we're going to do a little scene change real quick, and then we'll jump up. Before we get started, for our next speaker, I do want to give a plug to him. Ryan is here, and he has some books available. So after his presentation, after some Q&A, he'll be available to kind of do some book signing if you're available. So make sure you stop by to see that. But to introduce Ryan, I'm reading through his bio. I was like, man, I gotta get my life together and do some more stuff. It's pretty cool. He's a public speaker, diversity trainer, consultant, author, specializing in healthcare, campus inclusion, workplace issues impacting the LGBT community. And we look forward to what he has to offer today. So we invite Ryan to the stage. Thank you.
I will not trip on the cord. Not trip on the cord. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for the introduction, helping with everything, and for having me here today. Just so you know, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. For those of you who do not know where Nebraska is, that's okay. I mean, I hope you would, 'cause they're closer to us than many places I go, but we're just right smack dab in the center, right, of the U.S. Before I begin, I just want to reflect something that Mark said, because it's just so powerful. Sharing stories saves lives. Sharing stories helps us all break down our misperceptions and our judgments of one another, and realize that really all of us are a lot alike. We have different challenges because of different reasons, but we're all emotional human beings, and we can reflect with one another. For example, when you talked about your voice and your insecurities around that, think about all the transgender people that have insecurities around their voice, right? I'm thinking about the first 6 months of my transition from female to male, my insecurities going through those drive-thrus and having people man me, right? Or when I first began my transition, or 6 months into my transition after starting testosterone, my dad met me when he was not accepting of me. He said that I was dead to him. And he said, "You sound like a fag." Is that what you want, to sound like a fag? Our struggles, we have walked different paths. There's so much that we can connect with one another when we hear each other's stories. And really sit down and listen. And listen to the generations' experiences as well. Sometimes we try to push aside people that are our elders. Or in my experience in transgender activism, younger generations try to push aside people that have already got to a point where you wouldn't know you're trans, so you have passing privilege now. So your voice doesn't matter. When we do that, we erase people's experiences, the struggles that we had before, that we helped to bring forward so that you don't have that exact same thing. So we need to be able to support one another. It's so important. And to listen to one another, especially right now with what's happening in this nation across the board. When I first began my transition in 2005 in Lincoln, Nebraska, there weren't very many resources around for the trans community. There were some, but there weren't many, right? It was at this time that I was finishing my second master's degree, and I decided it was time to quit school and actually get a real job, right? And so I was going out and applying for different jobs right at the very beginning of my transition, when I looked like a 12-year-old boy at that point, right? And I was fortunate enough to be hired with Planned Parenthood as a health educator, focusing on LGBTQ identities in their community, and also focusing on eating disorders and body image. Because when we look at sexuality, eating disorders and body image fold on top of sexuality as a whole. So I was hired on to work with them, and the first day I walked into this office, I said, I want Planned Parenthood to offer hormone therapy services to the transgender community. And they said, okay, little health educator, I just got hired. That's nice, very nice. Go and do your thing, right? And I'm a type A personality that when I want something, and I think something makes sense and has logical reasoning, I'm gonna figure out how to make it happen. And so for the next 6 years when I worked for them, I was putting together all these different materials and all these different reasonings as to why we should move forward with transgender healthcare. And by the time I left, they finally moved forward with it. They're one of the few affiliates in the nation, actually, at this time that provide hormone therapy services for the transgender community, right? But it's so important for us to be able to continue to advocate for healthcare organizations to provide this care. Any healthcare organization can provide transgender healthcare services. What happens though is people get scared and they get fearful. Or the thing I hear all the time, whether I'm working within a healthcare agency, with a university, with a company, is I really want to serve the transgender community, but I'm terrified of making a mistake. can't learn unless we make mistakes, folks. I make mistakes all the time, and that's how I learn from them, right? We need to be able to just step our toes in, and then the more comfortable we get with things that we're fearful of, the better we're going to get at it, right? I find what's important to do first to help people break down the misperceptions that they have around the trans community is to look more specifically and understand the language that we use around this, right? And I understand we have different varying levels of understanding around the word transgender, gender identity in a room, but I always give this piece because I never want to assume people know it, and I think it's important to repeat it even if you've heard it, all right? So I want to break down the differences between sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. In our society, we oftentimes interchange the two words sex and gender as if they're the same. For example, if you're filling out the demographic form, they may either have a box or a line where they ask for your sex or gender, and they have male or female there, right? Sex and gender are two different things. Sex references the composition of our internal and external anatomy, our chromosomes, and our hormones. All those things combined create a person's sex. Gender has two tiers. One, our gender identity, which is between our ears, it's our brain, right? It's our psychological identification of gender. And two, our gender expression, which is a way that we express our gender. And I'll go into more detail about those two things in a second. Popping back up to sex, though. When a person's pregnant, what's one of the first things you may ask them? What are you doing, or what are you having as a boy or a girl? If you're having a gender reveal party, is it pink or blue in that cupcake, or balloon, or whatever it is, you know, that you have there, right? We live in a binary society where we recognize male and female, and that's it. Because we're just that good at development. It's just going to be male or female, that's it. There's nothing else there, right? It's not the case. Even looking at sex, you have individuals that do not fall within standard male development for sex, or standard female development for sex. And the word that we use for an umbrella term for that now, the current language we're using, is the word intersex. In the old days, meaning like 2005 and before, you probably would have heard the word hermaphrodite being used, right? But we do not use that word anymore because it's very misleading. There's a lot of stigma around that word. And also, to be a true hermaphrodite, you'd have to be able to have both male and female parts and be able to self-reproduce. And I've worked in sexuality long enough to know that pregnancy was not caused from self-reproduction, just like it wasn't the toilet seat, it wasn't the hot tub that caused it, right? Things have to happen in order for pregnancy to happen. So it doesn't even work to use as a term towards humans. Snails, earthworms, and some fish, yes, they can, but not humans, all right? So we use the word intersex. Again, it's an umbrella term to define individuals whose either external or internal anatomy, chromosomes, or hormones do not fall in line with standard male development or female development. So it's very complex. And there's one statistic that says when we look at intersex individuals, 1 out of every 1500 births, 1 out of every 1500 births is something physical you can see at birth, right? So it's generally something dealing with genitalia or something like the bladder being outside the body, right? But if we look at something internal that you cannot see at birth, something that someone may not discover until puberty if they're not going through puberty like other people, or maybe not until they're older and they're seeking to get pregnant and they're not able to, that ratio right now is at 1 out of every 100, right? 1 out of every 100. Some forms of being intersex are so mild you'll never know. Others are so extreme again you can see them at birth. But we can continue to ignore intersex individuals. When I work with medical students, they are not receiving any curriculum on how to work with intersex people. So that's another area we need to do more advocacy for and do more training on. Looking now to gender identity, as I said, this is your psychological identification of gender. Your gender identity can be different from the sex you were assigned at birth. For example, my sex assigned at birth was female. I'm not intersex to my knowledge, right? But at age 25, I finally understood that my gender identity was male. And I was able to access hormones and have surgeries to align my physical body with my brain. Because you can change a body, you cannot change a brain. No amount of mental health therapy right? No amount of pharmaceutical drugs are going to rewire a person's gender identity, just like a person's sexual orientation. We're born with it and it develops over time. We should not be using conversion therapy because that's highly unethical and is banned in 7 states across the nation, right? We should recognize again that we are all diverse when it comes both to sexual orientation and our gender identity. And when we look at gender identity, there are many different identities that fall underneath it. You know, I'm seen as a binary person because I identify as male, and I like to have a beard, I like to work out, I like to wear cowboy boots, right? That's just me, that's my form, but there's many different forms out there, and many different words that people may use to describe their gender identity. You have people that identify as non-binary, right? Non-binary is currently the umbrella term that we use for people whose gender identity does not fall within being identifying as a man or a woman, all right? A person who does not identify as a man or a woman has a non-binary identity, okay? Sometimes when I talk about non-binary identities, or when I go into deeper detail around gender identity, I'll have people look at me and go, Ryan, why do kids have to make this so hard? Why do we let them do this? They're all just going through a phase where you just tell them they're a boy or a girl, I'm be done with this, this is going to confuse them, this is a big mess, I'm so frustrated, right? And I say, listen, people are not making stuff up. What's happening right now in this nation, on many different levels, not just around sexuality, is what happens when you have access to education, right? When I was growing up, I remember that the internet was introduced my freshman year of high school. And at that time it was dial-up, so it took about 10 minutes to load any page. And it sounded like a fax machine while it did it. And if you were at home, you could not have access to the internet and be on the phone at the same time. No, it was all landline, right? What was even on the internet at that time was very limited. In fact, Google was not even introduced until 1998, right? So I remember I was introduced in my freshman year. So prior to that, and even after that, when we had our assignments, where we got our information was going to our school's library or our town's public library. Whatever books they chose to have on the shelves was where we received our information. Or you would get a gold star for using an encyclopedia. So whatever edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica you had in your library, you grab that. And if you're writing an essay about mammals, whatever that little M says about mammals, that's all you need to know, right? Now, you have a plethora of information that can take you into the deepest webs, the dark holes of the internet now with information. So people are accessing information about themselves. They're hearing people's stories. They're seeing those stories either in TV or on YouTube or other forms of social media. They're connecting in social groups. They're able to talk in an anonymous way. They're understanding more, so they're not going to remain silent. They're not going to try to say, well, I'm just going to fit into this box because you want me here. No, I need to be who I am, and you need to learn how to become comfortable with it, right? It's so important for us to be open and listen to people's identities with this. When we look at gender expression, this is our communication of gender. The way we walk, the way we talk, our voice inflection, the clothing we wear, our body language, all the things that we use to express our gender. While our gender identity is biological, meaning that we are born with a gender identity and it develops over time, our gender expression is socially constructed, all right? Meaning what we see as our typical forms and norms here in the U.S. looks very different if you go to other societies or cultures, right? For example, if you hear the word masculine, what descriptors pop into your head? Muscular. Strong. Large. Butch. Hairy. The way you carry yourself, the way you walk, the way you talk. John Wayne. Grunting. Clothing.
Deep voice.
Deep voice.
What I get called like every other day.
Sir. Sometimes I hear stinky, sweaty, emotionally unresponsive. What about feminine? What descriptors pop in your head when you hear the word feminine? There's so many, I'm not going to repeat them all. I heard soft. Say again? Dresses.
Overly emotional.
Overly emotional, pretty, dainty,
Fragile.
fragile.
Little.
Little.
There's one term I come up with, but I don't know if this explains compassionate.
Compassionate. When I said the word masculine,
Nurturing.
nurturing. When I said the word masculine, did an image of a woman pop into your head? But do you know masculine women? In different shades and forms of masculinity.
Jim Crawford.
Jim Crawford. No more wire hangers. No, sorry. When we go to feminine, did you have an image of a man pop in your head? Again, do we know feminine men? The different shades and forms of femininity that men can have. In reality, every single one of us in this room have masculine and feminine characteristics. Every single one of us, right? But when we say the words, when we think about it, we do what we do very well in this society. We go to the extremes, and we talk about hyper-masculinity or hyper-femininity, and we don't recognize all the different shades in between and how they relate to us, and how actually these words are words that can define any of us regardless of gender, but we gender the terms. For example, if I say aggressive versus passive, match that up with masculine and feminine, what do you do? Right? We've gendered these words. So we need to start taking a step back. We need to start taking a step back from our assumptions about people as well. All right? And allow people to just be who they are. For example, going down to sexual orientation within this continuum, a person's sexual orientation does not have to be correlated to their gender identity and expression. So what do I mean by that? I'll give a very extreme example. Let's say you have someone who's born assigned male at birth. His gender identity is that of a man. His gender expression is extremely feminine. And he's attracted to women and identifies as heterosexual. How many of us have been guilty, due to assumptions or stereotypes? I'll raise my hand right now. If we see an extremely feminine man, and we're like, oh, hey, how you doing? And then we see someone come up through the corner of our eye, and we see them cold hands, and it's a female, and he said, this is my wife, Sarah, and we go, no. No, you're gay?
She doesn't know.
Does she know gay? She's weird. I feel like he'd just be so much happier if he just came out. Does he know who I am? I mean, I don't want to just like say something and make it feel embarrassing. It doesn't. So maybe I'll just plan it where when he's walking out of the library today, I'm going to drive by my Subaru that has a rainbow sticker on the back and wave at him so he can see I'm part of the family, right? We have these assumptions, and we try to put people into boxes. And when we talk about the transgender community, people get even further confused because they try to make them the same even though sexual orientation and gender identity are different. When I was on Larry King Live both in 2007 and 2009 doing different panels. And the first time I was on with Larry, and he was like, okay, let me get this straight. I'm paraphrasing him, using his voice. You were born a girl, and then you were dating women, so then that made you a lesbian. I was like, okay, Larry, not really what I use, but okay. But then you transitioned to a man, and you're still dating women. So then does that still make you a lesbian? I'm like, no, Larry, this isn't how this works, right? But people try to make them the same, or we can think to the past, it's just, everybody's identity is different, right? And here's the key, we do not have to be experts in terminology, right? We just have to be willing, if someone shares something about themselves with us, and we don't understand it, say first, thank you for sharing this with me, right? It means a lot when someone trusts you enough to share something about themselves with you. And then two, would you mind sharing more with me about your identity so you can learn more, all right? Because we are all so complex. Sexuality is so complex. It's just not boxes anymore. It never was. But now with education, thankfully, we can push out of them further. So that's a continuum. When we look at transgender healthcare, though, one of the problems is that still to this day, we assign a person's identity for any one of us in this room based on whatever the genitalia is that the provider sees when you're born. Identity within the medical construct model says whatever the genitalia is, that's you, and this is how we're gonna name you, this is your clothes we're gonna get you, here's the toys we're gonna give you. When we raise you, we're either gonna be holding you, be more nurturing, or we're going to be more rough and tumble with you because we've been socially constructed to do that, right? Identity does not begin with genitalia. Genitalia is a piece of each and every one of us, right? It does not define who we are. For each and every one of us in this room, our identity begins right there in the brain, and it develops over time. All the multiple identities that are part of each and every one of us. But we still stay focused on genitalia. And for the transgender community, we see that this focus on genitalia is so pervasive that when we look at the politics or different things happening in this nation, that's all they're looking at. They're looking at genitalia. And then what they do, which they've been doing to the gay community now since at least the 40s and 50s, is they're aligning the word sexual predator with the word transgender. And this is ridiculous. It was ridiculous when they did it to the gay community in the 40s and 50s. It's ridiculous now in 2017 that they're still doing it. They just have a new target of transgender people for that, right? I can't tell you how many talks I give where all I focus on is the restroom, because that's where people get stuck. We're stuck on bathrooms and locker rooms. And I really just want to say each and every one of us has to use the restroom. Just let it go, right? But we can't do that. We have to talk about it. We have to start breaking down whatever is built in people's heads as far as their vision around this, right? Because I really just feel that what's going on right now is people just have this imaginary penis that's just like floating through the room that's just going to be like attacking people from time to time, right? It's like this imaginary detached penis. That's all they're looking at here. There we go. Transgender people cannot be in the room because of this, right? We need to start moving past this. Because again, when we look statistically at any reports of people being harassed in the bathroom, statistically there's been 0 reports of transgender people harassing anyone in a restroom. In fact, we're so terrified, we're just thankful to be able to get in and use it and get out and hopefully wash our hands, right? But when we look at that flip side, we have several reports of people harassing transgender people in the bathroom. So who's the real threat, right? A way that we can reduce a lot of this is just by having more and more gender-neutral restrooms on campus, in the community. More and more that everybody can choose from. Seattle has had an ordinance in place for the past year now where any restroom is a single-stall restroom. Anyone in the city. It has to be gender neutral. And it can't be a cutesy sign. It has to be one of their regulatory signs in the city, right? So you can't have a single stall be designated as either male or female. There are some places in Seattle that are going even further and just creating gender neutral restrooms as a whole. I was at this pizza restaurant with some friends last year after a conference, and I excused myself to use the restroom. And I start walking towards the door, and I see this word that says unisex. I'm like, oh, okay, and just assume it's going to be a single-stall restroom. And I keep walking, and I go through this archway, and notice there's no door that I'm pushing through to go through this archway. And then next thing I know, I'm standing in this room, and to my left are a bunch of women washing their hands. And to my right are just stalls. They totally Ally McBeal this restroom, right? Everybody uses it. It doesn't matter who you are. And everybody survives. It's not a big deal, right? And from a public health standpoint, which I'm always an advocate for, statistically we find that men are more likely to wash their hands if a woman is present. So it's a way to increase hand washing as well. I've been all in men's restrooms. I see what happens. People will like tip the faucet like this, like put 2 fingers on her and go like this. So this is really good for hand washing, right? To increase the spread of germs. For the trans community, when you first begin a transition, it's such a complex feeling because you have all this excitement, because you're finally starting to move forward, to move to a place where people are going to more and more see you for how you know yourself. But there's also so much fear and anxiety and nervousness. Because you're in that transition period, especially with hormone therapy, right? Where you're kind of in this in-between of how do you express your identity. For 4 months into my transition, even after chest surgery, removal of the breast, and starting on testosterone, I still identified as female in public because I didn't feel it was safe for me to walk around in public yet identifying as Ryan and he. It wasn't safe at that time, right? And so there's always different mixes of emotions that people may have during that time. And to compound on top of that, you have to deal with one just coming out. Right? You may have already come out if you're part of the LGBT community as LGBTQ, right? Or LGBTQIA, or APP. We're not going to go into all that, right? So, but then you have to come out again. You know, I remember for me, like, I came out to my parents 2 months prior to coming out to them as trans, as lesbian. And And it was so hard to do. I was so terrified. And I just remember my mom asking me on the phone, "Are you with your partner?" She didn't say partner, but with my girlfriend at the time. And I said, "Yes." And she's like, "Okay." And then she invited me down to Easter, right? Which I was so terrified all these years for this. And I was terrified of coming out to them as trans because I was fearful that they accept me as a lesbian, but they won't accept me for this next step, right? But then 2 months later is when I then came out to them as trans, and that's when they disowned me for 6 months. And so it was very difficult, that coming out process. You may have had one hurdle you've gone across, but now there's an extra one. Not just with your family or friends as well. If you're employed, dealing with employment, which I do a lot of training around transitioning employees in the workplace because it can be very scary for you. People could be really disrespectful to you during that time, or you may lose your job. Unfortunately, yesterday, Jeff Sessions sent a memo to the Department of Justice saying the Department of Justice should not be defending transgender employees who file workplace discrimination suits based on Title VII, which is the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that for the past 20 years, courts have successfully been defending gender identity underneath Title VII for sex discrimination, right? So he's given his directive to the Department of Justice. But just know this, his directive, just like Trump's tweet in July, his tweet, the tweet is not policy, that does not count. He may have that directive, but that's going to be challenged in the court systems. He cannot, Attorney General cannot change that law, right? So note that. But we still have an administration that each week is attacking the community, just like the administration this week as well, for the Health and Human Services Department, their fiscal year 2018 and 2022 programming, their strategic plan has completely erased any mention of the LGBT community. Any mention. There's no planning for the LGBTQ community in the Health and Human Services strategic planning, which will impact grants. It will impact funding. It will impact research, right? So we need to continue to vocalize our disdain towards this and how this is not right. And we have to keep joining together to fight this because it's going to keep happening if we stay silent around it, right? So for folks coming out in the workplace, it was scary before, but it can be really scary especially right now because of fear of what they're reading on the headlines versus understanding actually how policy does get changed. You also then have to just go through general social outings and how you're going to be treated there and if you're going to be respected. Looking at your legal protections and also finding medical and mental health care providers that are actually trained in serving the trans community. Right? Unfortunately, still, we do not have a ton of medical and mental health care providers that are specially trained or specializing in serving the transgender community. So you just have to find people that are friendly towards you. And when you're in rural areas, there's extra layers to that, right? To be able to find people that can actually serve you. So what we see is that many people in rural regions will actually just travel. Could be over to Lexington, could be to one of your other cities, or even further to find a provider that can provide the care that they need at that time. When we talk about trans health care as well, many people just focus on, well, just your therapy for transitioning, or they focus on accessing hormone therapy to begin the changes for your body physically, or they focus on the surgeries, right? Surgery is the thing that people oftentimes focus on, but that's just a piece of transgender health care. Trans folks need general health care like anyone else. Right? So you need to be able to go to a doctor that's going to respect you and affirm your gender when you have a cold. You need to be able to go to a doctor that respects you and affirms your gender when you have an earache or you break a bone, right? Or just get your daily or yearly vaccinations. It's so important for us to be able to recognize there's so many different layers of healthcare that impact transgender people just like anyone else. It's not just transition-related care, right? What we see for challenges for people in rural areas, or increased challenges for people in rural areas, because these challenges can also impact people in urban areas, is that many in rural areas may not be out to their families or friends, right? They may have more out in the urban areas for that. And so they have less access to support systems at this time. They also may have lower social engagement because they're not out, they don't feel comfortable going out around people because they have so much anxiety. They may be experiencing gender dysphoria at that time. We see that there's lots of economic barriers as well. In fact, we find that transgender people are 4 times more likely to have a yearly household income below $10,000. Right? 4 times more likely if you're trans to have an income below $10,000. We also see that you're less likely to have health insurance. Less likely to go and have STI testing done, even though you'd be more likely to be positive for certain STIs. Then also have less facilities that serve you for HIV preventive services. So I'm so happy that we have Hinky, right? So that we can have the rural areas actually have access to HIV preventive services. It's so important to be able to have that. This map here shows you healthcare insurance rules across the nation. All the ones that are in gray are states that do not have any protections in place among private insurers or Medicaid for transgender people. So Kentucky's in there, Nebraska's in there. Unfortunately, the majority of the U.S. is in there. The only thing currently protecting trans folks is the Affordable Care Act, right? So if that gets changed, there's a worry that we're going to be losing some protections that we have during that time. When we look at Kentucky specifically, there's Kentucky Trans Health that did a survey in 2014 of transgender folks here in Kentucky. 1 in 5 respondents said that they do not currently have health insurance. 3 in 5 said that they do have health insurance, but they're not out to their providers as being trans because they're fearful of being denied coverage, right? I remember when I went in 2006 to have my hysterectomy completed, I went to a provider that had never worked with a trans person before. And so I had my friend who went to her call her up and say, hey, would you see this guy? And she's like, well, we never worked with a trans person before, but bring him on in. So I was kind of the guinea pig for the trans people for them to serve. And I went into her and I said, listen, I know I need a hysterectomy, but I'm scared because my insurance card says male, and my birth certificate's been changed to male, so I'm worried about getting it pre-certified. But I'm not going to move forward unless it's pre-certified because of all my surgeries, I absolutely refuse to pay for a hysterectomy, right? That's mean. It's mean enough having that stuff in there. I don't want to pay for it. And so the doctor said, okay, well, we'll just write everything up and we'll explain everything, we'll send it in and see if it gets pre-certified. And so they did, and it did get pre-certified. And so next week I went in and had my surgery completed. Then the labs came back and they said, yep, this is all medically necessary. We approve this. 4 months later, right before Christmas, I get a letter from my health insurance company saying the gender doesn't match the surgery, we want all of our money back, right? So they did a post-payment audit. My insurance card was in, the surgery was hysterectomy. They said, nope, this was a mistake. And so the hospital sent the money back to the insurance company and sent me the bill. And I had to get a lawyer, thankfully through Land Legal, to assist me in appealing it. And an appeal did go through, but it was 2 months of a lot of stress for me to get that put through. And then ever since that, when I had this insurance, anytime I went to the doctor, anytime, I got a letter saying they were reviewing my claim, which I had never had before, right? So there is a lot of fear for folks around that. There's also, again, the aspect of looking at transportation. One, if you even have transportation to get you places, have money for that, and then have time to take out the day to be able to travel and take off work or get off school to access to providers that can assist you. Right? So it's important for us to be able to continue to create resource lists with providers that are trans-friendly in these regions, be able to work with organizations doing transgender health care to get these resources out there so folks know where they can go. Right now, for many trans folks, how they access health care is through word of mouth. Right? When we look at HIV in the trans community, we see the highest risk for HIV infections among transgender women. Right? The pie chart, I apologize for it being a smaller screen, but the pie chart can show you right now from the CDC the statistics that they had for diagnosis between 2009 and 2014 for trans men and trans women, but the highest rates being among African American and Black transgender women. Right? Those are the highest rates that we see of infection right now. And so why are we seeing these increased risks and what do we need to be aware of? Well, one, we have to look at the impact of discrimination and isms, both transphobia and racism, the impact of women of color. Two, then we have to look at, with discrimination, what does that do? That may prevent people from accessing employment, or being fired, or not having very much income because of that discrimination. And so what do? They may look towards survival sex work, so that they can have access to money to just meet basic needs in their life, right? With sex work, you have the increased risk of rape or sexual assault, sexual violence. You have increased risk of people using alcohol and drugs when engaging in sexual behavior, which decreases your decision-making around safer sex. IV drug use with using shared needles, or also people that can't access transition-related care, and so they do pumping parties, where you can take silicone-grade industrial silicone and inject it into different parts of your body to give you more femininity, to try to help you with, I'm going to use this word in quotations because it can be term that scary people, passing, right? To make you feel more comfortable navigating, to hope to decrease the amount of hate crimes that you may experience. Right now, we see that the average life expectancy for transgender women of color is age 35. Right? Average life expectancy. This year alone, we've had 20 transgender women murdered, 1 transgender man, so we've had 21 people that are transgender murdered in the US. We can see the high statistic of individuals are people of color. And also, if you look at where they've been murdered, the highest happens in the South. All right? So we need to be aware of this as well. And think about what can we do? What can we do to try to increase resources and try to decrease people's risks that they experience? Because these hate crimes happen either from someone they do not know, from law enforcement, or from people that they do know, right? It's important for us to be able to look around to organizations and see who's doing work right now and where there are gaps and what we can do as far as finding funding, getting grants, doing different things so we can, 1, work together, and 2, reach out to those communities that are the furthest marginalized, right? There's an organization in the Northwest called Pride, the Pride organization, that dedicates 40% of their funding to people of color in the Northwest area, right? So we have to look at ways that we can increase our funding for individuals. We also have to look at ways that we can increase, again, training, especially within healthcare organizations, or depending on your role, if you work with healthcare, if you work at a university, if you work at a nonprofit or a community organization, are things represented there? Are people represented? If people that are trans come into that building, do they know this is a safe place for me? Or are they getting the message that this is not a safe place for me, right? We can do this again from having more gender-neutral restrooms, having posters, brochures, and information that include transgender individuals, having non-discrimination policies that include gender identity and expression, and having staff trained, investing money in training to assist staff so they can better serve folks, right? I know I went a bit long, I apologize. I'm just going through these quickly. Does anybody have any questions for me?
We hear a lot of here about transgender people who can't get testosterone, etc. So they go on the internet and they get illegal drugs. How much of a problem is this?
So I don't have any statistics off the top of my head of how many people are accessing black market, for example, testosterone versus not black market, especially for trans men. And we also have trans women that will access black market estrogen as well. So I don't have a statistic off the top of my head, but it does happen, right? Especially for individuals whose income is lower than $10,000 because they can't get access to providers. For people that do have health insurance, or for people that do have a little bit more money, it's important to be able to explore options of how you can access your hormones, right? For example, I have health insurance, but I'm self-employed, so it's basically like I pay a ton for premiums, but it doesn't cover anything ever, right? And so I called up our Walgreens specialty clinic in Omaha, and they do this thing where they apply a discount card, right? So they scan this discount card, so I pay $43 every 4 months for my hormones. Prior to this discount card with insurance, it could be around $100. So those was a huge savings that people have, right? So looking and seeing if there's any type of programs people can have that they can offer. Or if you have youth that are doing puberty blockers or other things, some doctors will call the pharmacy in Canada that prescribes them, and the doctor will order them from that pharmacy, because then they go around the cost they get to pay through the actual pharmacies, and then the family will pay the provider for that. So for example, puberty blockers can be between $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 per month for a family. A doctor pays $560 for it. All right, so it greatly, dramatically decreases the cost there.
Do you know if Medicaid and Medicare cover the costs of medications?
It depends on which state you're in. So I recommend going to the National Center for Transgender Equality. Don't do NCTE because that's going to take .org. That's going to take you to the teacher's certification thing. Transequality.org is their website. And so they'll have maps that show you where there is coverage and what states have that coverage versus what ones do not. All right. I'm going to go out on a limb with an assumption and say probably Kentucky's like Nebraska. You might not have it, but that's just an assumption, so don't quote me on that. But accessing transequality.org can get you those resources.
My good friend has it, and it does cover his testosterone.
So yeah, okay.
It's they, whichever the other ones can get it, that Gabe, either one. I know his covers it.
Hormone therapy is covered. He's had it covered.
And he also got his top surgery covered.
He did.
As well.
That's good. So this is good. And again, oftentimes it may depend on how the doctor writes or diagnoses and codes the care.
Yeah,
So-
they try to get you to jump through a lot of hoops, but if you know the correct way to do it. So if you need answers,
And that would be great information to have somewhere for a community resource for folks, so they know how that works.
Okay. I wanted to ask this because it's something that I've worried about, as a, straight person. What is a tactful way to ask the person what their preferred pronoun is? Because I wanna call people what they want to be called, but I don't wanna ask them in a way that's offensive or makes them uncomfortable.
Right. Well, this is a question where people are going to have different answers depending on the individual. There's no perfect way. Let me just tell you that. There's no perfect way to figure out how to ask people what pronoun they use, right? One is, though, if the person, the person's trans, if they told you they're trans, right? Then say, hey, I don't want to offend you, and I want to make sure I use the right pronouns. So can you tell me what you use, what pronouns you use, right? So if you know that's the way to do it. You just want to ask anybody, well, you look kind of non-binary. What's your pronoun? Right? So, sometimes people will say, hey, if we're doing group meetings, let's have people introduce themselves with pronouns. There's been pushback on that, and I've pushed back on it from the beginning, right? Because one, for me, it's actually quite uncomfortable for me as a trans person to do that. Other people may feel comfortable with it because they feel like they have to out themselves in that space of work with people that they don't know. Right? So if you do have something like that, just give people the option to do it, don't force people to do it, right? Say, hey, we're going to introduce everybody. Here's things you can introduce about yourself, right? But you don't have to. Here's the, so give them that option. Other people may do something to try to let people know that you're friendly, like if you don't know they're trans. If you do email communication or things like that, you have a signature line, putting in your pronouns there. So that's kind of the thing like, hey, you get it, right? So there's different ways that you can do it. If you're picking up on something with someone, like you're using a pronoun, you're picking up this energy. Say, I'm picking up a little bit from you. Is there something I've said that's offended you? And it doesn't have to be that it's specific to pronoun, that just could be in general to open up that dialogue.
Right.
Yeah.
The continuum you have, I've seen and I've used with high school students in certain areas. And one thing I do add is also your sexual experience or behaviors. Because your sexual orientation and your sexual experience might actually not be what you think it is.
Right.
So that's another thing I add. And I talk about how some of these are fluid, you do a good job of saying that. So I just wanted to add, sometimes I add like your sexual experience as well, because that doesn't necessarily align to how you are attracted to people.
Right. If I would have had more time, you could have gone at differences between orientation, behavior, and
Yeah,
attraction.
exactly.
Yeah, but it's so important because people get so stuck. And people in the LGBT community can get really stuck thinking that, what do you mean you can have sex with and then identify as gay? Doesn't
Yeah.
work, right?
That continuum is a great way. We do it with Gumby. We draw Gumby
Yeah.
on the outline. It's just a great way to educate people. So I appreciate it. It's great to hear someone else agree.
Yeah.
I have another good friend whose parents have written his obituary and posted it on Facebook that their daughter's dead. What would you say to someone who's going through something like that?
So, people that posted on Facebook, was their daughter a trans woman or was?
He's now a trans man. He was born.
Okay, so they misgendered the person on Facebook. Okay. So this is complicated with family, right? You can try to send a private message saying, hey, I noticed this, that this person identified this way, but the family may not listen to that because they're going through a grieving cycle. And I don't know when the person came out to them or how long that history has been with them or their relationship was, right? But you can have conversation just doing general quotes talking about, it's so important for us to misgender transgender people, especially after they pass into respect to their identity. The family may not want to listen to that, right? You may want to post it publicly on their wall. That may have backlash as well, right? So it's more just having conversations with other people. Like, you know, if someone does pass away or if there's been a hate crime or something, some reporting, we need to make sure that people are using the right pronoun. Unless there's a mistake. Like, for example, this week, I made a mistake. I mispronounced someone. So Andrea Gibson, spoken word person. I didn't know Andrea Gibson went by they, them pronouns. And Andrea just posted a really powerful video via BuzzFeed, and I shared it via Tumblr, right? And then I used the word she, and then someone private messaged me, which I actually appreciated, just saying, hey, just heads up, Andrea goes by they, them. And I messaged her back and said, thank you so much, because I didn't know. And then I corrected the post, and then put an asterisk on that post to let people know I made a mistake. Because I think it's important for us to be able to let people know we make mistakes. We need to own our mistakes, and we apologize and then correct it, right? But with the grieving parents with loss of it, it's I would have to know the whole history to be able to get better guidance. I think people probably don't want to sit through all that. So, I'm sorry that that happened. That's the main thing. I'm sorry that happened for that person and for the loss that we had.
So as, it's one thing when you're going through transitioning, but post-transition, what can I do? What do you wish that I would do for you? Or any person that's going through this? I mean, I have my own, I really wish my eyes on this particular issue. You could just do this. How can I help?
Well, you worked in the library, correct?
No,
I'm sorry. Okay, sorry.
But
Who was the library? Oh, you, sorry. You two were together. I got confused. So, well, you could have more trans books. I have a few you can select from over here for sale.
I'm in a art director basically,
Okay.
so communications, marketing, working on recruitment material.
Okay. Well, one, looking at recruitment material and saying, you know, how can we have all identities represented, right? And again, it doesn't mean that.
May I have your attention, please? Library will be closing in
15 minutes. Okay.
Thanks for any items returning now to circulation desk at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so looking at materials and how you can have more diverse representation in marketing materials, right? If you have, for university, you can get on work groups for trans inclusion. And working together in work groups with different people in different departments, what can we do on this campus to make it more trans inclusive for our students? And here's the deal, when we make environments more trans inclusive, it's not just inclusive then for trans folks, it's inclusive for all folks. It's pretty amazing what happens when we do that, right? So again, these initiatives to do that. You know, if you're part of different organizations, advocating for more awareness around the trans community. Because the best we can do is just keep advocating for one another and being programming around diversity and inclusion in all identities in these spaces. I know people have time constraints. We've gone over 8 minutes, and so I want to close this part. And I know there might be a closing here. If people are interested in my book or other books that I publish, I have them over there. They're usually $20. I sell them for $15 at events, cash or credit. I'll sign them if you like. So thank you again so much for having me and for having these quotes here as well.
I forget we got books on sale. So, based on the time frame that we have left, we did want to open the floor really quickly if there was any burning questions that anybody had that didn't get an opportunity to ask their questions during the time that our presenters were speaking. We open the floor really quick so we make sure that if anybody has any questions, we can go ahead and address those now. Anybody has any?
I was just going to, some of our presenters will be around for a few moments. If you have a question, you might want to just ask one-on-one. We understand that as well, that you may not want to do it in an open forum. They'll be around for a few minutes, so please go up there, introduce yourselves, thank them for going there. It's not easy standing in a room full of people and talking and sharing your story, so I appreciate each of you sharing your story. I know that can be troublesome. I'll be here sometimes, and the podium will be shaking. It's like, so I appreciate you understand the feeling. So we do want to thank each and every one of you for coming out. We hope that it's something that you're able to gain, not only for yourself, but something you can take back and share with someone else, because it's not just about us knowing, us understanding. We have to share it with someone, you know. Let's not be too selfish with the information. Let's share with someone so we can educate people and make ourselves a better community, and once again, kind of gain that unity across different spectrums. So once again, we thank you. Make sure that you check out the program. We have got a program Before you leave, there's private events all weekend. Come back and visit the AIDS Quill until Sunday. We encourage you to do that. If you have any questions, we're around to kind of assist with that. So thanks again for coming out. We appreciate everyone.